Pimax just dropped their newest VR headset, the Crystal Super, but for me to even consider this over the tiny big screen Beyond 2 that I tested just a couple of weeks back, it's got to have higher specs in almost every way. Well, it kinda does. Pimax are calling this the first Retina level VR headset with a resolution of 3840 by 3840 per eye, which is just mind-bending. That is almost 30 million pixels inside this VR headset, over double what you'd get in a big screen Beyond 2, and over triple the Quest 3. Now, the term Retina was first coined by Apple many years ago when they were describing their own displays where you couldn't see the individual pixels from a normal viewing distance. That's never really been an issue on VR headsets because the lenses just aren't clear enough to the point where you can actually see the gaps between the pixels. It is something that you can see on the Meta Quest 3 because the lenses are so good, but then it's also not so much a high resolution headset, and it is also something you can slightly see on the big screen Beyond 2, but it's mostly because these headsets just have really good lenses. The display inside the Crystal Super is actually removable, which I think is super cool. So this is the QLED mini LED version that I have here. Pimax are also working on an OLED model, which will be ready in a couple of months. But yeah, if you're a real enthusiast, you can swap between the different modules inside the one headset, which is really cool. It's completely toolless as well, just a really nice mechanism. That's really it. Personally, I'm hoping that this means easier upgrading down the road because, I mean, Pimax are going to be working on this and maybe less so on this. This seems to be pretty consistent among all of their headsets, so maybe they don't want to ship an entire one of these each time. It also means that potentially it's more affordable to upgrade down the road. At least that's what I'm hoping. Now, the exterior has been slimmed down a little bit at the front, but it's still a very big, heavy headset. I do find it pretty comfortable though. You've got this kind of headrest at the back here, which if you sit it quite low on the back of your head and then you wind it up quite tight, I've found that to take the pressure off the front of your face. And actually you can do a 3 to 4 hour session with this thing, no problem. Now, it is a heavier headset, but you do get some pretty cool features along with that. One of them being inside out tracking. So you don't need a Steam VR base station for this headset to track on your head and, track within the space of the game. You just chuck it on and it tracks perfectly. I would say it actually tracks as good as a base station or two, at least in my experience in the racing sim. It also means that if you want to chill out, take a bit of a break from gaming, you can hop outside the sim, walk around, examine your car, watch the track and the cars go past, and yeah, the tracking actually works perfectly. You also get motorized IPD adjustment, so you just plug in your IPD in the software and it adjusts it with the motors built into the headset. IPD is the distance between your pupils. You can check this with an app, by the way. I found one called iMeasure, which is pretty accurate. The reason those motors are even in there in the first place is so that this can eventually do automatic IPD adjustment. You won't need to mess around with any numbers or apps or anything like that. But yeah, not working at the moment. It gave me an incorrect IPD, which Pimax are aware of, and they're currently fixing it and tuning it. The Crystal Super also has something called dynamic foveated rendering. It uses eye tracking to only prioritize the rendering to where you're looking, and where you're not looking, it will render at a lower resolution to save a bunch of performance. You can see here on the monitor as I'm looking side to side, it's rendering the non-viewed portion at a lower resolution. So a couple things I noticed here. First of all, the eye tracking is really quick. You don't notice it switching from point to point. As soon as you look at the new point, it's already rendered it at full resolution. The eye tracking is pretty fast. The other thing though is that the lower res peripheral vision, the stuff that you're not looking at, since it's now at a lower resolution, it's a lot more shimmery and distracting than it was before, at least in Assetto Corsa. I've played around with the different foveated rendering presets, but even the quality preset for me was still more distracting than native. I'm also not seeing any performance benefits on my 5090, although Pimax have tested this internally and they are seeing some pretty good uplifts. So I don't know, maybe a driver update or some fine tuning needs to be done here, or maybe I'm just CPU bottlenecked or something. I'm actually getting worse performance with this turned on, but that's not typically what you'd expect. 30 million pixels in a VR headset. I've got to say, it really is something. I mean, looking at the display on my steering wheel here, it is just supremely detailed. All of these thin little lines, which would maybe on other headsets be a little bit shimmery, a little bit stair-steppy. There's none of that here in the Crystal Super. It is supremely high resolution. The fence line in the distance as well, the fog rolling in over the horizon. I mean, it just does look really incredible. But I have to say, I really would have loved some better lenses on this headset after just reviewing the Big Screen 2, where everything is in focus and there is no chromatic fringing. I mean, almost at all. It is something that I am noticing and I am pretty conscious of in this headset. For example, if I'm just looking straight ahead, everything is unbelievably clear and detailed. It is really, really impressive. But even if I just glance down at my steering wheel here, there is a lot of softness, a lot of chromatic fringing, especially in these lower buttons here. For me, I mean, I'm going to be honest, these lenses don't feel like a massive upgrade over the Crystal Light. Maybe a little bit of a bigger sweet spot. For me, I'm mostly noticing the wider FOV compared to the Crystal Light. The FOV on this feels pretty similar to me compared to the Big Screen Beyond 2. But where there is a massive difference is when we shift over to nighttime. So I've actually done exactly this on the Big Screen Beyond 2. And I've got to say, it took my breath away. It was a mesmerizing experience. I almost made an entire video just about this, sitting in a car in Assetto Corsa modded at night in VR, because it looked so unreal. Here with the Pimax Crystal Super, I'm just not getting that same effect. With the Beyond 2, you've got OLED, you've got pixels which can individually switch off and you can get perfect black levels. Even with the tiny bit of glare in that headset, you are getting an unbelievably deep, punchy image. Here though, the blacks, they're not black, they're more like dark gray, and because of the local dimming, I actually get a lot of blooming around the steering wheel and other little lit objects within the cabin here. It's just not blowing me away anywhere near as much as that other headset. So yeah, Mini LED versus OLED, absolutely monstrous difference if you're doing any nighttime driving in VR. I know there's a lot of stuff to think about for these headsets, so let me break down how I'd score them in different areas. This is all subjective scoring. You can't use a benchmark for this kind of stuff, unfortunately, but I've used these headsets a lot at this point, most of the time, even back to back with the same track, car, and even weather settings. So for the lenses, I would break this down into a couple separate components. The center focus, also known as the sweet spot, the chromatic fringing, where the Big Screen 2 has the least amount I've seen so far, and also the FOV, or field of view. I would put the Super here just slightly above the Big Screen Beyond 2. Then there's the display quality, which I would break down into the perceived resolution, basically how much detail you can see, the contrast, basically how deep the blacks are, and also the color, how vibrant and real everything looks. Here, it basically comes down to OLED versus Mini LED versus LCD, but the extra pixels in the Super aren't unnoticed. You can definitely see them. You'll see more detailed textures and less shimmering, but it's not as massive as the numbers would suggest. I hope this also puts into perspective how much better the Crystal Super is compared to a Quest 3. It is a completely different tier of headset. I mean, it should be for the amount of money that you're spending, but it really, really is. I also don't want the Super to be overshadowed too much by the Beyond 2, because there is a lot here that I really like, and it is an improvement over the Crystal Light. The textures and the fine detail that you can see with this headset within the sweet spot is insane. There were plenty of moments where I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. The inside-out tracking was also flawless for me, and the DTS add-on speakers are simply the best in the business. Now, the OLED display module that I mentioned earlier should help close the gap towards the Big Screen Beyond 2, at least in terms of contrast and saturation. That model is also going to be very high res, so it should carry some of the benefits that we're seeing here, although the display modules are smaller and it's going to be using pancake lenses. So Pimax says lower FOV and potentially worse lens quality as well than what we have here. So personally, I'm going to be sticking with the Big Screen Beyond 2 for my own VR sim setup, but it's not for the reason that most people would assume. It's not just because of the size, it's actually mostly because of the lenses and the difference that the OLED panels make. If Pimax had the optical quality of the Beyond 2 in this headset, it would be game over for everyone, but they don't. And it's a shame, because if they want to make 8K, 12K VR headsets, they really need to nail those optics.